Good morning and welcome everyone. My name is Stein Andersson and the Department of Psychology has appointed me to act as chair of the defense for Olgerta Asko's public disputation. Master of Psychology Olgerta Asko will later today defend her dissertation publicly for the PhD degree. The title of the dissertation is Predictive Processing in Human Prefrontal Cortex, Causal Contributions of Orbitofrontal and Lateral Prefrontal Subregions. Olgerta Asko will now give her trial lecture. The topic for the lecture was set by the committee. She will lecture on the topic, the role of episodic memory in future thinking and decision-making. Olgerta, the floor is yours.
Hi everyone, and welcome to my trial lecture with the topic, the role of episodic memory in future thinking and decision making. When most people think about memory, they picture something like a mental archive where we store the past. But today I will challenge and expand that view. I will argue that memory is fundamentally forward-looking. Evolution didn't design it just to preserve what happened in the past. It designed memory to help us imagine what might happen in the future and make better decisions because of it. During the lecture, I will first define episodic memory. Then I will explore why this matters for decision making. I will explore I will show how it connects to future thinking, and then I will explore why this matters for decision making. And finally, I will bring these threads together and make some conclusions. To illustrate episodic memory, I want to ask you close your eyes and think back to a birthday that stands out, maybe a childhood one, maybe a recent one that mattered to you. Where are you? Who is there with you? What do you see or maybe smell? So open your eyes. Did you see yourself in that birthday memory? This is episodic memory. Around 50 years ago, psychologist Endel Tulving revolutionized our understanding of memory by distinguishing between systems within long-term memory. Semantic memory is our general knowledge about the world, facts and concepts that are not tied to personal experience. Knowing that Oslo is the capital of Norway, this is semantic memory. Tulving called this noetic consciousness or simply knowing. Episodic memory is different. It stores personal experiences and special events from our past. It involves remembering an event and the feeling of mentally traveling back in time to relive the event with us as the main character. Tulving called this autonoetic consciousness. Episodic memories involve the recollection of visual imagery and the feeling of familiarity. They are time and space stamped, rich with sensory details and emotions. So to study episodic memory experimentally, we need a definition we can measure in behavior. A widely used framework breaks memory into three testable criteria. First, content. An episodic memory must contain specific information about an event, and this is the what happened, along with information about the context, where or when it happened. Not all three elements are required. Memories involving subsets like what, where, or what, when, also qualified as episodic. Second, structure. The information about the event and its context is integrated into a single, unified mental representation. Third, flexibility. A true episodic memory can be expressed to support adaptive behavior in a novel situation, in situation different from where it was originally learned. Now that we have behavioral criteria for episodic memory, content, structure, and flexibility, where do these functions sit in the brain? Studies consistently point to a region deep in the brain, located behind the templates toward the midline. This area is called the medial temporal lobe. The medial temporal lobe is often described as a memory hub, a set of interconnected structures that work together to form your episodic memories. At the core of this system sits the hippocampus, the light blue area there, a seahorse-shaped structure that gives episodic memory its defining character. So think about meeting a friend at a cafe. There is a lot of information your brain needs to capture. Who you are with, what objects are around you, and that's the what. The layout of the cafe, the corner street with the big windows, that's the where. And the fact that this happened yesterday afternoon or a week ago, that's the when. And the hippocampus helps binding these elements into a single integrated episode. Without it, people can remember fragments but struggle to form coherent event memory. But encoding a memory is only half the story. We also need to use those memories. That brings us to the prefrontal cortex, the area behind your forehead. The prefrontal cortex provides top-down control, helping to organize information for more efficient storage and selecting which memories are relevant for what you are currently trying to do. If the hippocampus helps binding the episodes, the prefrontal cortex helps you search and use the right episode at the right moment. Now that we somehow know what episodic memory is and the brain regions that support it, I will ask you to close your eyes again and imagine your birthday 10 years from now. Where are you? Who is with you in this birthday? What do you hear? Maybe your favorite music? How do you feel? You can open your eyes. This is future thinking. Tulving argued that episodic memory isn't just about storing events. It allows us to mentally project ourselves into our personal past and even into the future. Sadendorf and Corbalis later coined the term mental time travel to capture this capacity. Looking backward is retrospection, re-experiencing past events. Looking forward is prospection, pre-experiencing events that might happen. The key claim is that remembering and imagining aren't separate abilities. They are two directions of the same underlying system. So this laid the foundation for the idea that episodic memory may have evolved not primarily to record the past, but to help us simulate and prepare for possible futures. But is this actually the case? And do remembering and imagining really share the same cognitive and neural mechanisms? This brings us to our next question. What is the evidence linking episodic memory to future thinking? The theoretical framework of mental time travel opened up a new research agenda and future-oriented cognition began to attract significant attention. Future thinking isn't one single mental ability. Within future thinking, we can talk about different operations, processes we use when dealing with the future. Simulation is constructing a possible scenario. Prediction, estimating the likelihood of an outcome. Intention, setting a goal. And planning, organizing steps to achieve that goal. And we can use both semantic memory, our general knowledge about the world, and episodic memory, our personal experiences, when we think and act towards the future. Given our focus today, I will zoom in on episodic future thinking, the ability to project on oneself into the future to pre-experience an event. We use our autobiographical memories, our past life episodes, to experience ourselves as the protagonist in a mentally simulated future scenario. And this future scenario is complete with emotional, physiological, and cognitive states. But why we spend energy on episodic future thinking? Because mental simulation lets us prepare, testing actions and outcomes before we take real-world risks. So let me illustrate the adaptive functions of episodic future thinking with my own preparation for standing here today. So one function of thinking about our future is decision making. When I prepared this talk, I had limited time and too much material. I mentally simulated a few different versions of it and compared them. What to include, what to cut, before choosing the larger, long-term reward of a coherent presentation over the temptation to include everything. A second function is emotion regulation. I have memories of presenting before. I can recall how it felt, and by reliving those emotions, I could prepare for them today. This didn't work very well. A third function is prospective memory, remembering to do things later. For example, if I picture myself checking the time during the talk, then that attention becomes easier to carry out when I'm actually here. Another adaptive function is spatial navigation. I have been in this room before. I can mentally walk through it, picture where I will stand, how you will be sitting. And this let me plan my movement before I even arrive. So episodic future thinking lets us rehearse the future. We choose more effectively, regulate better, and remember what we intend to do before we act. But how does the brain build these simulations? A leading account explaining how episodic memory supports future thinking is the constructive episodic simulation hypothesis, proposed by Schachter and Addis. The core idea is that memory is not a passive replay system, but it is constructive. The brain retrieves details from multiple past episodes and then recombines them into novel episodes, happenings and scenarios that haven't happened yet. Now, if the hypothesis is correct, we would expect a relationship between memory quality and future thinking quality. Behavioral studies have shown that people who recall the past with rich, vivid details also generate equally detailed future simulations. People with poor memories produce poor future thoughts, showing that the future thinking system is supported by the episodic memory system. Now, if remembering and imagining share this constructive mechanism, we should see overlap in the brain as well. In 2007, Addis and colleagues conducted the first neuroimaging study directly comparing brain activity during remembering and imagining. participants were instructed to either recall a past event or construct a future event. They found that during the elaboration phase, when participants were fleshing out the details of their past or future experience, brain activity was almost identical. The same regions were engaged, whether people were remembering past events or imagining future events. Sachter and colleagues synthesized this and other findings into what they called the core brain system that is consistently activated while remembering the past, envisioning the future, and during related form of mental simulation. Prominent components of this network include the lateral and medial temporal lobe, including the hippocampus, of course, consistent with its role in binding episodic details. Medial prefrontal regions and some posterior regions are also engaged during both tasks. Now, and here's where it gets even more interesting, this core network overlaps with something called the default mode network. The default mode network was originally discovered as a set of regions that becomes more active when people are resting, not focused on external tasks. For years, researchers thought this was simply the brain doing nothing, but we now understand the default mode network very differently. It appears to support internally directed cognition, thinking about ourselves, thinking about the others, remembering the past, imagining the future. So this third picture comes from a study by Øsby and colleagues from our department here in Oslo. They showed that functional connectivity within the default mode network, measured when participants were simply resting, predicted how well they could remember past events and how well they could imagine future ones. So this means that the same network that activates when our mind wanders is the network that supports mental time travel. This makes sense when you consider that mind wandering often involves replaying past conversation, imagining upcoming events, thinking about what might happen next. Now, neuroimaging tells us which brain regions are active during a task, but not whether they are necessary to perform the task. To answer that, we move from correlation to causality. We look at what happens when these brain regions are damaged. If the same region underlie both remembering and imagining, then damage should impair both. Reis and colleagues tested amnesic patients with medial temporal lobe damage. They asked them to construct narratives about past events, future events, and crucially to describe pictures shown right in front of them. Patients produced fewer internal episodic details, specific events, information like action, perceptions, time, space, and emotions, when describing both past and future events. As you can see in the first picture, it was the same for remote past, recent past, near future, or distant future. So this ability was impaired. But their picture descriptions were normal in the second plot. So this was not a general storytelling problem. It was a specific deficit in constructing past and future events from memory. That implies that future thinking draws on the same episodic construction system used for episodic recollection. Another study by Hassabis and colleagues examined patients with bilateral hippocampal damage. As expected, they couldn't recall past experiences, but critically, they also couldn't imagine future events. When asked to imagine lying on a beach, they couldn't do it. They could retrieve semantic facts about beaches, like sand, wave, sunshine, but couldn't bind these elements into a coherent scene. This indicates that the hippocampus provides the framework for binding elements into complete scenes, regardless of whether you're looking backward or forward. But the hippocampus isn't the only critical structure. Bertossi and Caramelli examined patients with ventromedial prefrontal cortex damage, the other keynote of the core network we discussed. These patients showed reduced rates of mind wandering across all tasks compared to both healthy controls and brain damage controls. When they did engage in mind wandering, their thoughts were restricted to the present, as you can see in the second bar plot. So they never reported future-related thoughts, the third one, and their past-related thoughts are also significantly reduced. They were mainly focused on the present moment. So ventromedial prefrontal cortex damage appears to impair the ability to escape the here and now altogether, to mentally project oneself beyond the present moment. The authors propose that the ventromedial prefrontal cortex helps construct future-related scenarios by integrating personal relevance and affective significance into our mental simulations. So together, these lesion studies show that when the episodic memory system is damaged, people lose the ability to construct rich, detailed future events. Showing episodic memory is necessary for future thinking. We can also conclude that both nodes of the core network are necessary, but for different reasons. The hippocampus binds elements into coherent scenes, while the ventromedial prefrontal cortex integrates them with personal emotional meaning. So until now, we saw that episodic memory and future thinking share a common cognitive and neural architecture. Behaviorally, people who remember in rich detail also imagine in rich detail. A core brain network activates for both past and future thinking. And damage to key brain structures impairs both capacities. This addressed the first part of my lecture, the role of episodic memory in future thinking. Earlier, I mentioned that one of the adaptive functions of this system is decision making. Now I will examine this more closely. How does using episodic memory to simulate the future actually shape our choices? Decision making is the process of choosing between alternatives by evaluating their expected outcomes. Not all decisions work the same way. When we decide on our usual coffee order, the choice feels instant, almost automatic. That's because habitual decisions are fast and low effort. They rely on learned stimulus-response associations built through repetition. Goal-directed decisions are different. They are flexible and cognitive demanding. We mentally represent the options, evaluate each one, compare their values, and choose the action most likely to achieve our goal, typically the one with the highest expected reward or utility. This is often described as value-based decision-making. Some decisions can rely mainly on semantic knowledge, general facts and rules about the world. For example, you know Oslo is an expensive city, so you budget accordingly. Other decisions, like choosing a career, benefit from episodic simulation, where we mentally simulate personal relevant outcomes. Episodic simulation can be especially useful when we cannot have direct experience with the options, like choosing a new career. In this situation, we cannot just repeat the habit, and semantic rules may be too general. We need a way to construct what an outcome might feel like and what it might be worth. So neuroscience has begun to systematically investigate how episodic simulation support reasoning about new options is decision-making, indicating 3 memory-based processes which can support flexible adaptive choices. Generalization is the ability to apply what you have learned in the past to new, similar situations. The memory system recognizes structural similarities between a new situation and past experiences and transfers value information accordingly. When we encounter something new, the hippocampus can retrieve similar past episodes and through interactions with other brain regions help build generalized value representations. So rather than treating every choice as an entirely novel past episode, informed decision in situation we haven't encountered yet. Inference is the ability to reach new conclusions from information we already have, conclusions that we were never directly experienced. For example, you learn from one experience that restaurant A is better than restaurant B, and from a separate experience that restaurant B is better than restaurant C. From this, you can infer that restaurant A is better than C. So the hippocampus stores these separate episodes and can link them when they share a common element. In this case, it was restaurant B, allowing us to retrieve and combine information to guide new choices. Third, deliberation is the process of actively weighing options, evaluating pros and cons before choosing. Importantly, in deliberation, we are not simply retrieving a pre-stored value from memory. We are constructing evidence by mentally trying out different options and comparing simulated outcomes. So during decision-making, the episodic memory supports constructing values through generalization, inference, and deliberation. This fits the constructive episodic simulation view. The same flexibility that lets us recombine elements of past experience to imagine the future also supports decision-making. Now let's look at empirical evidence. One of the most studied paradigms showing how deliberation supports decision-making is delayed discounting. But before going to delayed discounting, I want you to see this video that captures a similar idea. This is the classic marshmallow test.
Okay, sit in that chair. All right, here's the deal. Marshmallow for you. You can either wait, and I'll give you another one if you wait, or you can eat it now. When I come back, I'll give you another one, so then you'll have two. But stay in here and stay in the chair till I come back, okay? All right.
Okay, I think this was enough. So, of course, watching that video, most of us will think that, oh, of course, I can do it. But if we put this into adult terms, imagine someone telling you, oh, I'm coming with your coffee in 2 hours, just wait. Yeah, then we understand how the kids can feel here. So, and of course, this I just show you this video because it's very similar idea with delayed discounting. So delayed discounting is our tendency to devalue larger future rewards in favor of smaller immediate ones. In other words, the future away The further away a reward in time, the less it feels like worth right now. But this temporal bias is deeply rooted in our psychology. However, research shows that episodic future thinking can counteract this tendency. When people vividly imagine specific future scenarios, enjoying the holiday they are saving for, or experiencing the health benefits of exercise, they become less impulsive. They choose larger delay rewards more often compared to immediate, smaller ones. And the key reason for this effect is that episodic simulation makes the future feel more concrete and real, and therefore carries more weight in valuation. The effect of episodic simulation on delayed discounting has been found across many studies and diverse populations. Now, so memory retrieval, memory recollection can provide the internal evidence we need to evaluate outcomes we cannot directly experience right now. The next step, the next step is to understand how the brain assigns value to what we retrieve or imagine. This figure summarizes three paradigms that converge on one idea. Hippocampal dependent memory fits valuation during decision making, which means that when people decide what they prefer, they often draw on stored experiences, memories, to estimate how good each option will be. Those remembered details are used as evidence to build a value signal. In paradigm A, participants first learn a memory association. A blue square predicts a gray circle. Later, the gray circle is paired with reward. When asked to choose, participants prefer the blue square, even if it was never rewarding, showing that value can transfer through a remember link. And this transfer tracks activity in the hippocampus. In paradigm B and C, decisions that require retrieving information from memory consistently engage both hippocampus and ventromedial prefrontal cortex. And in panel D, when activation maps are overlaid across these tasks, the overlap falls in hippocampus, ventromedial prefrontal cortex, and striatum, a shared circuit for bringing memory into valuation. And all these findings support a simple framework. In perceptual decisions, evidence comes from the outside world, but in many value-based decisions, evidence is constructed on the inside by sampling information from memory, including episodic-like fragments of past experiences. A key study by Bakur and colleagues tested this idea that value-based choices rely on internal evidence recollected by memory. First, in fMRI, healthy participants choose between familiar snacks food. Importantly, even though the items are familiar, people often decide by mentally sampling past experiences. How did this food taste last time? Was it satisfying? When did I have it? The key result was that hippocampal activity increased with deliberation time. The longer the decision it took, the more the hippocampus was engaged. Second, they tested patients with amnesia due to hippocampal damage. These patients were slower and their choices were less consistent with their own preference ratings, even though they took more time to make a decision. Crucially, this wasn't a general decision problem. On a perceptual decision task, where evidence was on the screen, patients performed normally. So the hippocampus isn't needed when evidence is external and concrete, but it matters when evidence has to be constructed internally. The take-home message of this important study is that even in simple familiar choices, value-based deliberation can involve sampling from memory, likely including episodic-like fragments of past experiences, and this process depends on the hippocampus. So this neuroimaging and lesion evidence expands the anatomical scope of the decision neuroscience beyond classical reward regions, such as ventral prefrontal cortex and the striatum, to include hippocampal memory mechanisms. The last evidence I will present in this lecture, it comes from the aging brain. As episodic memory declines with age, decision-making often changes as well in predictable ways. A key vulnerability comes with aging is associative memory. It becomes harder to link an option to its outcome. So this choice paid off. Or a person to a past behavior. This person was unfair to me. The retrieval of specific episodic details also declines. And memories can become less precise, consistent with age-related atrophy in hippocampal, medial temporal lobe, and parts of the prefrontal cortex. So these changes matter for choice. Older adults can have more difficulties in separating high versus low value options. They show more decision errors and less consistent preferences. They often become more cautious, avoiding risky or ambiguous options. Even mild memory decline can increase vulnerability to scams and repeated social costs, because negative outcomes and warning signs are not remembered as clearly. So when memory becomes less detailed and less precise, decision-making can suffer, especially when the right choices depend on past experiences. So now let me bring together everything we have covered. This diagram captures the central argument of my lecture. Episodic memory isn't just about storing the past. It provides the raw material for constructed future simulations. These simulations then inform decisions by letting us evaluate options we have never directly experienced. But notice the arrow return to the top. So once we make a decision and experience its outcome, that outcomes become a new episodic memory, updating the system for future choices. This can be seen as a continuous, self-improving loop. Memory, imagination, and choice are not separate abilities. They are free expression of a single system evolved to help us navigate an uncertain world. And before I close my lecture, I want to leave you with one final thought. So throughout this lecture, I have argued that episodic memory is the foundation of flexible decision-making. It allows us to break free from the present and navigate an uncertain future. Now consider artificial intelligence. Both AI and humans simulate possibilities and scenarios. But the basis of that simulation is fundamentally different. When we simulate the future, your brain retrieves fragments from your past and flexibly recombines them into something new. This is constructive episodic simulation. AI simulates differently. It has vast semantic knowledge, processed at speeds we cannot match, but this knowledge comes from statistical pattern in text, not from lived experiences. AI has never been anywhere, it has never felt anything, it has no episodes to draw from. And perhaps most fundamentally, AI has no self. Tullving's autonoating consciousness, the self-knowing awareness that you persist through time. AI lacks this entirely. Episodic memory is pre-linguistic, rooted in embodied sensory experience. Large language models exist only within language. What makes us uniquely human is not just that we remember, it's that there is a self doing the remembering, grounded in embodied experience, imagining futures from lived moments, making choice no algorithm can fully replicate. This is the power of episodic memory. And I would like to thank you for the attention.
I would like to thank Olgerta Asko for her trial lecture. I will also remind you all that the public defense of her doctoral dissertation will take place today here at this room at 12:15. Please be seated. Welcome, everyone. My name is still Stein Andersson, and the Department of Psychology has appointed me as chair of defense of Olgerta Asko's public disputation. Master of Psychology, Olgerta Asko is about to defend her doctoral thesis publicly, which is entitled Predictive Processing in Human Prefrontal Cortex, Causal Contributions of Orbitofrontal and Lateral Prefrontal Subregions. On the 18th of September 2025, Olgerta Asko submitted her thesis to the University of Oslo and requested the opportunity to defend it for a doctoral degree. Professor Anne-Kristin Solbakk from the Department of Psychology, University of Oslo, has been the main supervisor for the dissertation. The co-supervisors have been Associate Professor Tor Endestad, Department of Psychology, University of Oslo, and researcher Alejandro O. Blenkman, Ritmo, University of Oslo. Following the proposal by the Department of Psychology, the Faculty of Social Sciences appointed the following people to serve as the adjudication committee. Professor Leslie Fellows, McGill University, Canada. Associate Professor Iria San Miguel, University of Barcelona, Spain. And Professor Sasha Frihaus, Department of Psychology, University of Oslo. The committee has come to the unanimous conclusion that the thesis is worthy of defense. The Faculty of Social Sciences has agreed to this. The candidate held her trial lecture earlier today, on the 19th of January. The topic for this lecture was set by the committee, the role of episodic memory in future thinking and decision-making. The committee found that the trial lecture has been held to their satisfaction. What now will follow is the viva, or the public defense of the thesis. The following two people have been appointed to serve as official opponents. Professor Leslie Fellows as first opponent, Associate Professor Iria San Miguel as second opponent. Everyone in this room is entitled to serve as an ex auditorio opponent. If anyone wishes to do so, he or she will be given the chance to speak after the two opponents have finished and is asked to report their request to me before I invite the second opponent to begin. Today's schedule will be as follows. The first opponent will give an account of the thesis, followed by a discussion between her and the candidate. This will last for approximately 1 hour and 50 minutes, that is until 13:45. We will then take a break until 4 o'clock, until 2 o'clock. And please remember that the schedule is tentative and subject to the dynamics of the discussions. After the break, we will hear from the second opponent. And finally, any ex-auditorio opponents will be given the floor. I hereby call upon the first opponent. Please.
All right, wired up. It seems like a lot for a small room to need a microphone. All right, let me put this into display mode. And thank you for the opportunity to be here and to participate in this defense. The preliminaries have been culturally interesting. I was pleased to have a meal with shrimp. I'm sure that's part of the preparation that's required. With my omega-3 fatty acids at appropriate levels to address the matter. Before I start on my brief account of my take anyway on this dissertation, I'm struck by the word opponent, which has been used repeatedly, and think of it though this tradition of having a public defense of PhDs, which in various ways happens, I think, everywhere, not about defense in the same sense as a court. But more about the fact that science is a social enterprise, and that the fundamental idea of empiricism that we together try to determine if we have evidence to support a notion or not, and that having various perspectives on that is what makes science science. And so it's certainly the spirit of the process from my point of view to have the chance to have a discussion about the findings of Olgerta's work, but also maybe to just think about the fact that we're doing it together. And before I even go to there, to think about how the science came from, in this case, work that I'm sure was highly collaborative because it involves multiple methods. It working with human beings, people with neurological disorders, and that intrinsically means a lot of collaborative work. So to think about the group effort underpinning this science from the point of view of the researchers, but also of the clinicians and the patients who were participating. And to also comment on the fact that the two opponents have come from different parts of the world to be here today, and to think about the fact that science brings us together across boundaries, which didn't seem to be something I would ever say in the past, but these days I feel it's important to be celebrating things that bring us together. So thank you, Olgerta, for doing this great work so that we could get together to talk about it. So this is not a tradition where I come from, the idea that an examiner would present the thesis. So bear with me. I will very briefly give you an overview of what I understood anyway of Olgerta's thesis. So it's an investigation of the human frontal lobe contributions to sensory predictive processing, sensory, specifically in the auditory modality, and over relatively short timescales. There are two studies in the thesis. I would say there's a centerpiece study and a second study. I think it's kind of how it's put together. And there's one task, mercifully, only one task, so we'll really have a chance to come to grips with exactly what the behavioral manipulation was. But multiple methods. It's a very ambitious and rich data set with with a single task examined in a variety of ways in terms of the effects, the impact of carrying out the behavioral task as reflected in electrophysiological signals measured with scalp EEG and with intracranial recordings from epilepsy patients implanted for the second study. And also looking at the effects of focal lesions to the frontal lobes on the EEG. So that's no small undertaking. Usually in human studies, either there's a lot of trouble gathering the data or a lot of trouble analyzing the data. In this case, congratulations, the work clearly involved a lot of effort on all aspects. So the objective stated in the thesis, the primary specific aim as stated, I'm more or less quoting here, is to address the causal contributions of orbitofrontal cortex, a particular subregion of the frontal lobes, to violations of expectancy or prediction violations. And as I mentioned, there's all kinds of expectancies, but here we're focused on sensory patterns or sensory sequences, and particularly auditory sequences using a version of the auditory oddball task. And the outcome measures are the electrophysiological responses of the brain measured with EEG, either at the scalp or intracranial, and the so-called event or evoked potential method. And the focus is on the responses that followed violations of expectancy or violations of the predicted sequence. The first and the main study looks mostly at what happens after such a violation. And the second study looks at the evidence that the brain is preparing for potential deviant stimuli. So one of the things that I liked about this thesis was that there's this effort to get at causality. One of the challenges with studying the human brain is that most of our methods are correlational. And to get at causal information is not easy. And that is one of the things, as Olgerta mentioned earlier in her talk, it is one of the things that a lesion study can tell you, is give you some information at least, or some evidence that a brain region is critical for, somehow necessary for, the outcome that you're interested in. So the causal contribution, especially I would say of orbitofrontal cortex, was tested here. Causal to the ERP. So we're kind of working at multiple levels here, looking at the effects of a lesion on the evoked potential evoked by this auditory oddball task. There was also a lateral frontal group, a group with damage to another part of the prefrontal cortex, and there were healthy controls to help us understand what the normal response should be. And as I mentioned, study 2 also it included some of this evidence, but also used intracranial recordings to get with exquisite timing at the signals that were occurring in or evoked in various regions of interest within the prefrontal cortex, and from where the intracranial recording electrodes happened, of course, to be placed, since they're placed for clinical reasons. And that information was used very appropriately to try to get at the question of timing of what comes first in specifically in the frontal lobes in relation to this. So because this is a very serious and somber occasion, it seems, I thought I would start with a traditional Far Side cartoon. So the work that we're talking about is about a kind of thinking. It's about getting away from a very basic stimulus response idea of the brain to the mechanisms that help the brain do a better job, a more sophisticated job of navigating, especially the stimulus part. So that's the idea of predictive processing. And we heard earlier today the idea about predicting the future in terms of the long-term future, or episodic narrative type of ideas. But the idea that the brain is spending a lot of effort on predicting is a really important idea. And that's important to adaptive behavior in general, a very general function of the brain that, because of the generalities, probably, well, we have good reason to think is the result of different levels of potential prediction, that there are many potential computational mechanisms to allow prediction. And why is that? Because prediction is so adaptively valuable. My favorite periodic table element, OH, the element of surprise, which is a mismatch between what was predicted and what actually happened. And we know that that is a very important signal to drive learning. But for that to happen, we have to have a prediction. Where does that prediction come from? And that's what this work helps us understand. If you have no surprise, then you don't learn. But that's okay, because if you have no surprise, you know everything. You don't need to learn if there's no surprise. So the more fine-tuned your predictions are, the more you continue to have that learning signal. You can imagine that that is a really strong kind of biological mechanism to help an organism get better and better at successfully navigating an environment that may well contain surprise. So that's a really important and really general function of the brain, and that generality brings certain challenges. So we heard this morning, and I agree with the general idea that we remember the past to allow us to predict the future. And if we're talking about sensory events, which we are, then predicting sensory events makes for more efficient representation. We know that the brain is not representing all the sensory information available to it in principle, but rather the sensory information it really needs to represent. And it does that by kind of guesswork, by predicting what's coming next, and only or representing things that happen regularly and predictably by with less and less neural energy, that you don't need to put much brain power into representing things that remain consistent, and that you know about those consistencies by experience. I'm looking at this beautiful hardwood floor, but I'm not really representing whether it might be moving. It would be very surprising if the floor moved. And my brain is really not expecting that, even in Norway, where things may be different from what I'm used to. The likelihood of variability, we know from lots of different kinds of experience, has an influence over what parts of the perceptual world are going to be attended to. And so even though we know these things make sense, and you can see why it would be valuable for the brain to be good at that, we don't necessarily understand very well how that works. And so that's what this thesis is partly getting at. I like to think of it as, I'm in my spare time, I'm sorry to say I'm involved in the administration of the Faculty of Medicine where I'm from. And I like to think of the predictive processing as really the best kind of continuous quality improvement. I don't know if that's a buzzword here in Norway, but certainly a buzzword in North America. And you're learning either that the environment is stable or that the environment is not. And both of those pieces of information are really, really useful. Of course, you can also predict, we're talking about sensory predictions, you can also predict other things. Even in these very short timescales, you can predict the outcomes of choices. And that's more actually my own research is actually more in that regard, related to, for example, reinforcement learning. And you can predict the outcomes of motor behaviors, and in that way optimize your motor performance. And perhaps we'll get a chance to talk about some of those connected ideas as we go along. So if prediction is a very general function, then it probably and I think of self-evident, I believe, adaptive advantage, it's likely to have neural mechanisms at multiple levels. And in this thesis, the discussion is couched in terms of a hierarchical sort of setup for predictive processing. And I will look forward to discussing that. But the brain is, as you know, kind of built up through evolution, the human brain built up through evolution, not necessarily in an orderly hierarchical way, but more by a kind of Rube Goldberg sort of machine where additional stuff gets put in on top of existing systems and stays there because it works a bit better, but the underlying systems may also be working, and they may work together or they may be working in parallel. And that can lead to, when you're tangling and contending with a really fundamental idea like predictive processing, that can lead to challenges because you're potentially observing predictive processing happening for neural reasons or neural mechanisms that are different at different levels. I'm just going to sort of throw that out there. The other point that I'd like to bring is the importance of context. So, for example, the fact the floor is not moving is something that I fully expect in a building on a foundation in as serious a place as the University of Oslo. But if I run a boat, for example, I would totally expect the floor is moving. So that's context of what to expect. It's nothing to do with what floors look like and everything to do with what context I'm in. And that idea of context-specific models of the world and how refined and how they are really arranged and how we shift between them, I think, is first of all where the frontal lobes are especially important. And second, I think one of the areas where we still understand the least about. And I think that this thesis helps us to get at that. Using a task that's relatively simple to help us think about even small variations in context and how the brain and the person navigates those. So is it a good idea to study predictive processing? I think it is a very important topic. As I've just said, I think predictive processing helps, it shapes how we see the world, how we represent and interpret how we hear the world, and how we interact with it. And I do think that understanding better how predictive processing is happening, whether it's at circuit levels or at neural mechanistic levels more fundamentally, could be and already has to some degree offered some new ways of thinking about brain disorders, which we need. We need new ways to think about brain disorders. There's lots we don't understand about either neurological or psychiatric disorders, where predictive processing may be relevant. And we already talked a little earlier today about AI, but the work that we're going to discuss today is fundamental work that is pertinent not only to clinical application potentially, but I think even more so just understanding how the brain works, and may perhaps give some inspiration to computer scientists looking for such inspiration. So the brain regions we're talking about today are in the frontal lobes. And the frontal lobes have a lot of different subsections. And the focus is on the orbitofrontal cortex, which I've shown in my very rough diagram here as this section of the frontal lobes. One of the advantages of lesion methods is that you don't have to get too bogged down in the anatomy because you don't have the choice about where you're making your lesion. You're taking patients with damage to an area that you're interested in. So while we know that there are cytoarchitectonic differences and connectivity differences, even within, for example, orbitofrontal cortex, for the purposes of talking about at least the main study in this dissertation, the term orbitofrontal cortex actually, I think, probably captures kind of a chunk of tissue that's more or less like this, because that's how lesions typically come, just the basis of lesions that affect the base of the frontal lobes. Typically affect, of course, not only the prefrontal cortex, but the underlying white matter, and typically are more medially placed and typically, to some degree, encroach on what you might call ventromedial prefrontal cortex, that is the medial wall just adjacent to the orbitofrontal cortex. So that's just a bit of terminology. And OFC is the main area we'll be talking about, but I would contend that it's probably more true that it's the ventromedial frontal lobe that's being studied in relation to lesions. Intracranial recordings are another matter. They are placed very precisely and they are cortical. The lateral prefrontal group, that's the comparison group here, just happen not to have much overlap of damage within the group. So while that group is valuable to think about the specificity of orbital frontal findings, I don't think we can actually make strong claims about. We'll see if Olgerta talks me out of it, but it's unlikely that we'll be able to make really strong conclusions about lateral prefrontal contributions in a regionally specific way for reasons that we'll discuss. But if you don't have enough patients with common damage to the same region within this very varied area of lateral prefrontal cortex, then you're unlikely to have power to detect specific effects. All right, so the orbitofrontal cortex, there's a lot we don't know about that region. It's perhaps the least well understood part of the frontal lobes, arguably. It's great to see this research coming at it, which from my point of view, a rather different angle than how I usually think about orbitofrontal cortex. There's maybe at least two big views about the human orbitofrontal cortex, probably preserved in non-human primates, and more debate about how it looks in rodents. One is the one that I think pertains more to the work today, which is the idea of this region being important somehow in establishing schemas or task sets or cognitive maps or a sort of flexible working space representing what's pertinent to the goals of the moment. And the other is seemingly rather different, which is value-based processes. It's an area of high interest to neuroeconomics and to decision neuroscience in terms of a region that's thought to be very important in tracking value, subjective value of stimuli, for example, to allow choice. Whether these two are two rather separate undertakings that just happen to both be carried out in this relatively big place, or whether there's an underlying set of mechanisms that's going to tie this together is not so clear. And the OFC is connected to the outside world through multiple sensory channels, but actually auditory less, arguably, than some others. Taste and smell are the most obvious big connections into the OFC. It's often thought of as higher order, taste and smell, gustatory and olfactory cortex. But higher order visual information, for sure, object information, and auditory information. But it also represents internal states, and that's thought to be important in what it's important for, to help match internal goals with external information. So hunger, for example, of an internal goal. And lateral PFC we talked about already. So these are the specific aims of the thesis, is to identify the EEG responses to violations of expectancy or prediction violations at two levels of simple auditory sequences, and the terminology local and global are used. And then to investigate the OFC contributions to these EEG responses to prediction violations. And then in a second study to investigate the OFC and potentially lateral PFC contributions to anticipation of auditory sequences, particularly the likelihood that a deviant or a prediction violation event was going to happen. And these are the major findings as I understood them. First, all participants were able to detect and report these deviant auditory events. That's deviations from the underlying more common pattern. So there wasn't a lot of behavior in this task in terms of the human beings' output. Lots of neurophysiology, but not a lot of behavior. To the extent that there was a behavioral readout, there was no effect of the brain damage on the readout, and all the participants were able to detect these deviants. In terms of the ERP responses, which were the outcome, the intended primary outcome, there were responses to local and global prediction violations. And in the people with damage to the OFC, there were impacts, there were effects, changes, differences in the EEG responses compared to the healthy controls and to the lateral frontal patients. And specifically, there was a diminished mismatch negativity, a relatively early response to the local and global stimuli, and also a delayed P3A about potential. That was really the main finding. The orbitofrontal damage, people with orbitofrontal damage also had difficulty, and this is a sort of a second step in the thinking around this, in seemingly preparing for anticipating the likelihood that there might be a deviant. And again, the EEG signal in the anticipatory phase was altered by that damage. And then the last finding that's, I think, worth highlighting is the intracranial recordings showed that the orbitofrontal cortex anticipatory responses, preparing for the next auditory event, were occurring first in the OFC and then in the lateral PSC, which, at least for me, was a bit surprising. So I don't really want to keep talking much longer. I would much prefer to be allowing you to hear directly from the person who actually understands this material better than anyone here. But I will say that the examining the thesis was a pleasure. That the work is very interesting. That the analysis approach is very thoughtful. Multiple methods, not easy to do. Not easy to wade through that much data, and the thesis was very well organized. And it opens up all kinds of things to discuss. So I would rather have Olgerta come up and discuss them than keep talking. So I invite her to come and defend her very nice work. And you're already doing better than I am by being able to turn on your microphone. So you just had the painful experience of listening to me trying to convey why this was important and what the main findings were. So before I start with kind of more detailed questions, I wanted to give you an overview question to give you a chance to tell us what you want us to remember about this body of work that you've done. It's a really rich data set. There are 2 studies, lots of different kind of approaches and thinking. And I think we're going to have the fun of getting into those in detail. Well, it should be fun. What's the most important discovery in your thesis? What is it that you want? What's the key insight or the key finding that you want us to remember after all the details have fallen away? What's the main takeaway message that you've taken from this work?
Yes, I think the main thing, as you very well highlight as well, is the role of the orbitofrontal cortex in this sensory predictive processing, that it has not previously been highlighted, or I don't know if there are studies actually showing this role. And then I think this opens up more research to be done and see how and why this frontal area is involved in sensory perception and the detection of mismatches. And since this hasn't been really shown before, I think this was the main thing in my thesis, like how the orbitofrontal cortex build up expectations and then how detect deviances and prediction errors in the auditory field. That is also important.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that is the most sort of novel and surprising part of the work. So thanks for highlighting it. So you just heard me give an impassioned call for studying predictive processing, that I do think it's an important topic to understand fully. And you've just opened the idea that the orbitofrontal cortex has not been studied much with respect to sensory processing, especially auditory processing. So when you started the project, what on earth caused you to pursue this idea? Why did you choose to focus on orbitofrontal cortex, and why did you decide to choose auditory processing?
Yeah, so actually this was not the project that I started.
Wow.
However, I created the research question around what you mentioned. So I was really interested to explore more the predictive processing. That is a framework that is like there is a lot of research the last 20 years, and then I was really curious to learn how the frontal lobes are involved in this predictive processing, that is such a general kind of capacity of the brain, but we don't know so much, or especially from the lesion research, we don't know. We know very little about how the frontal lobes are involved in predictive processing per se, and especially in this type of oddball local global auditory tasks. So the two things that really motivated me to start these projects and to formulate these research ideas were like my curiosity to learn more about the prefrontal cortex. That it's what makes us do all these high-level cognitive functions, and then to see what is the role of this area in the predictive processing, and like how much we can learn from the lesion brain, and how like damage in prefrontal cortex can affect these processes.
Of all the senses, I would have thought auditory would be at the bottom of the list in terms of the orbitofrontal cortex's kind of auditory inputs.
I think there is research, new research coming on and showing how the auditory, how the orbitofrontal cortex is actually affected primary auditory areas, and like how lesion in the OFC, or it's mainly also animal studies, how when you deactivate actually the orbitofrontal cortex, the responses in the sensory cortex are altered as well. So there is some research coming on. Of course, not so much.
Well, maybe there
However,
should be more.
the group I work with, we work mainly with auditory similar. Yeah, it's also like I choose, but also it's so part of the materials were there, and the setup of the research as well. So, but I think choosing to actually work with the auditory in the auditory domain, I think I learned a lot. So
You're not sorry.
Yeah.
When you think about what the OFC may be contributing, which we're going to get to talk about in more detail in a moment, but do you think of it as somehow specific to the auditory domain, or working on specific auditory channels, or as a very general set of mechanisms that OFC may be contributing to that would potentially function in all sensory modalities, or in even perhaps multimodal integration?
Yeah, I see the orbitofrontal cortex as hub, kind of like that helps us to build internal models, and this is not directly and only in the auditory domain, at least from like how I see it after my my readings and my work. So we built up there maybe some models, and so this area sets the states of where we are, like in the task, but this is not. So I studied the auditory domain, but this I think it can be multi-domain. So the OFC can also influence visual, or
So I guess to be really concrete about it, if we did similar experiments using visual inputs or somatosensory inputs, do you think the results would be the same?
Yeah, I think if we use some visual oddball paradigms that I have in my mind now, at least, I think that the role of the orbitofrontal cortex will be still there, and the involvement. Okay. So I don't think it's specific to auditory. However, I cannot say with the data I have are auditory. No. So, but yeah.
Okay, I'm starting with some sort of conceptual questions before we get to your data in more detail. So, as I mentioned, you've got the one task, and it's the same task throughout. And I think it'd be very helpful to the audience and to me also to really hear you explain the task and this global-local distinction and what you were trying to get at with the task. Can you tell us more about it?
So the task is a very simplistic auditory task. So we have sequences of 5 tones. The globe, like usually you have 5 standard tones repeating, and then occasionally you can have a deviant global sequence that is 4 tones and then a deviant tone occurs, or 4 tones and then an omission occur. So at the local level, you get the deviant when after the 4 standard tones, you have a deviant or omission, and this is called the local deviance. At the global level, global deviance can be, so during the block, the global rule is learned, is built up. So you can have what it is, a global deviant, is a repetition of either 5 standard tones, 4 standard tones and a deviant, or 4 standard tones and omission. So then, because this is repeated, this is the global pattern that is the standard global deviant. And then what is a standard,
Yeah.
and then what is a global deviant is every time that a rare sequence happened. Yeah.
And how often were the rare sequences? How rare were the rare sequences?
So the rare sequences were approximately 12.5 and 12.5. Like you can get like the irregular sequence or the omission regular sequence. So 25% in total.
Okay, so they weren't that rare.
Not that rare, yeah.
Okay,
but to build up this the global rule, and then to have the opportunity to have a good number of trials to analyze for the global deviant happened, then it was like approximately 12% for each global deviant. So
it's kind of a semantic nuance, but basically people have got individual tones to think about, and then a little melody, I suppose. I don't know, it doesn't sound like music probably, but the 5 tones together make a little pattern.
Yes.
That there, and the global has to do with them looking at that bigger pattern as it's becoming more or less frequent across some of those patterns are less frequent.
Yeah.
The global oddball, but I guess I'm wondering what it was like to do the task, and what was the instruction?
The instruction was just they have to pay attention on the global. So every time that a deviant or an uncommon or rare tone sequence occur, they have to count it and they have to report it at the end. So they don't pay attention on the local deviant. So every time that after 4 standard tones something unexpected happened, but they have to pay attention on to learn first the rule. So what is the common standard sequence, and then every time that deviant sequence occurs, they have to count this and report this written at the end of each block.
Okay.
So they have also to count.
They're counting, and they're asked to pay attention to the bigger pattern, to the global pattern.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they were paying attention to the big, and since they had to count the global deviant, then they pay attention to the global pattern more.
Okay, or at least they were instructed to.
Yeah.
Yes, and they did well enough to do the task. So
the counting was accurate, but I think the counting in this task is mainly to make sure that they pay attention. So it was not the main thing we wanted to measure anyway.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it might help in the future to have some. So for the second study, for example, we added some responses, motor responses as well, every time that they detect a global deviant. So it might help to get a bit more about their behavior itself when you have them to respond manually.
Okay, I'm going to come back to that. I'm sure you're not surprised that we're talking about that. But before we do, I want to talk about the timescales of the prediction errors or the prediction violations, because you've got 2 timescales.
Yeah.
Can you just kind of give us a sense of the timescales, like how many milliseconds or seconds elapsed between these?
Yeah, it was like the whole sequence was 600 milliseconds. So they have the duration of the tone was 50 milliseconds.
Okay, so they're very brief.
Yes, and then 50 millisecond duration of tones, and the whole thing 600 milliseconds, and then the whole block was approximately 3 minutes.
Okay. So it's really, to the extent that we're thinking about it in terms of, and I don't know if you're thinking about it in terms of memory, but do you think about it in terms of memory? And
during when I was working with the data and analyzing, I have thought of working memory mainly, or short-term memory. And what we measure here can be also like how well they are in respect to working memory performance. But so we know that the lesion patients, they perform well in working memory tasks from our neuropsychological questionnaires. So this made us think that it might not be exactly working memory, but it's actually what we wanted to. It's more about like deviance detection.
Okay, so deviance, noticing something, an infrequent event, I guess, somehow detecting infrequent events.
Yes.
Which nonetheless means you are maintaining some representation of what's frequent.
Yeah, then, yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, one of the ways that sensory cortex, as far as I understand it, might on its own be able to track repetition versus surprise, or an infrequent event or a deviant, is really just even very local. Even at the neuronal level, there's, as you repeat the same stimulus, there's a decrement in the electrical response even of individual neurons. And why do we need to get all involved with frontal lobes and extended circuitry
so this is why at least I thought we needed this global level. So they have to learn a pattern in order to see, and this pattern to influence how surprising actually the the rare tone was. So so somehow they build a rule. They have to learn this rule, and this rule affects their response, the ERPs, on how surprising a deviant can be or not, or an unexpected tone can be or not. So, and I think this was our main aim with this study, to see how the frontal lobes or the orbitofrontal cortex helps us learn these global regularities, and how this internal representation of very simplistic even sounds affects the sensory processing of them.
So when you started out, did you expect, because your most straightforward results are actually at the local level?
At the local level, yes.
Is that what you were expecting?
No.
Okay. Surprise.
So I was expected, to see an effect in the global level. So every time that they detect a global deviant, and of course the pure global one, this would be like really the one I was hoping. However, so and this or like what we would expect also to see some behavioral kind of index of the counting itself, but we didn't. But I think what we saw for the local and global, it is an index of like a global kind of effect. at least how I see it right now. So because when the deviants, the local deviants, were also unexpected by the global rule, then we see ERP response that it lasts longer, and we see also it's larger in amplitude compared to when we see compared to the response to the only pure local deviant. That it means that somehow when that the global rule actually is influencing their ERP responses. And we see also attenuation in the OFC patients, both in MMN, mismatch negativity, and the P3A. That is, yes, of course, more like censoring, processing, and the P3A might be more orienting, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so the fact that we didn't see it actually for P3B, we explain it as that, and it kind of links well with our behavioral results, that this component was mainly indexing the counting or the paying attention, and that it's not so much about the deviant processing and the orienting to the deviants or to something new in the environment. It's more about like they have the ability to overall count the deviant, the global deviant. So this ability was not decreased in the patients. It was something related to just them detecting the deviance and how the global learning rule affects this detection.
So the P3B, you mean, is you're kind of throwing it out as not important in this task, or not of interest in this task, but it's sort of like a background thing that had to do with the...
it was a component that both for the local plus global deviant and for the pure global, it was present for both lesions and controls, but there was not a difference. So, and the way I explain it, at least, is that this component, it was mainly indexing, counting, and paying attention. That this has been also linked a lot previously. And then what the components that were mainly into the deviance detection and prediction error was the MMN and P3A.
Right. So really early and most clearly in the data at the local level with the local deviance.
Yes.
Like that's where the difference between OFC and controls was clearest.
Yeah. So for the pure, for the...
Is it helpful to think about the explanation for this in terms of context? You're talking about rule, but of like I've sort of been frustrated over the years with much as I would like to be more precise about what I mean by context. But often orbital frontal cortex, or for that matter the frontal lobes, or for that matter the brain, but anyway, at least the frontal lobes are spoken about in terms of their role in optimizing behavior in context. And OSC's lately been specifically proposed as a space where context-specific information is being held. You kind of talked about it this way already yourself. Can we bring that idea to a more rigorous description in the task you used? There's a sort of a time window context, I guess, that's going on.
Yes. So they had to learn the pattern, and then with second study, we saw that somehow they also learn or could expect or anticipate when the deviant is coming based on how many standards have passed. So, and this it makes me think that, and of course the orbitofrontal lesion group was impaired in this aspect, so they didn't have this anticipation of what is coming next. So this makes me think that the orbitofrontal cortex is an area that helps us build the context and learn what to expect. This is
What to
how it's
expect and when to expect it, or just what to expect?
Yes, what to expect, and maybe when to expect it, because they were more prepared when the longest it takes the deviant to actually come. So somehow they were also anticipating when deviant is coming.
Out of curiosity, and maybe it's in the thesis and I missed it, but because there is a kind of learning you talked about here, I guess it happens rapidly. Did you actually look to see if there's an evolution in any of these signals over the course of the task? Like you would expect that by the end of the task, people would be particularly well prepared to recognize the regularities and the...
If the CNV, for example, the anticipation signal was changed and with learning?
Or just with experience, I guess.
Yeah, the task itself, it's as I said, simplistic, so it's not that a lot of learning occurring, and I think they are getting bored at some time.
Yes.
So it was really easy to learn.
Right.
However, I haven't checked if this has changed from the first block to the last one, but I think something interesting maybe to look at.
Okay, so I want to come back to something that you mentioned a few times, which is the behavior. The old behavioral readout was not the main focus, and it was simple, and that people were fine with it. But what do you think, given that OFC damage didn't disrupt that simple behavior, people were, despite the fact that they weren't as prepared somehow, perhaps, behaviorally they were reporting the events. So what behaviors do we need the OFC's contribution for in this context, in this kind of situation? Like if you were going to design the new task and include behavior, what behaviors would you propose as potentially relevant?
I have thought a little bit about this because it was also like so it would be nice if we had a better kind of behavioral measure there. So having a motor response, for example, it's one option. Having a more complicated pattern, maybe it will get us some better indexes of how the lesion can affect behavior. More uncertainty, maybe, just inducing more uncertainty.
I mean, you got effects even with this really remarkably, you got effects with a pretty simple... it seems like you would probably have gotten effects just with the standard oddball task.
Yeah, but it seems that the counting itself, so they're still able to do the counting. So it might be that other areas are compensating.
Or that OFC is never involved in that.
In the counting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think, like if we were going to question the patients or their families, like given what you see, the EEG changes, what would you expect that they might have trouble with behaviorally? Even in an experimental task or in the world, whatever. Yeah.
Just making mind foundings, like putting them in a broader kind of everyday context, I think then just this, like what we show here is that the OFC patients with lesion to the OFC can have trouble to use input or external evidence to make and build up some predictions about what will happen in the future, or even decision makings, and then probably they will be less surprised when something that they don't expect will happen, and maybe this signal cannot work that well for them to improve their learning in the future. But this is like really
their sensory learning, their perceptual learning.
This is what I study. It's mainly perceptual learning.
But that's, I'm asking you, I guess I'm pushing you to know. I'm supposed to oppose you, so I'm opposing you. I'm provoking you anyway. that it would be helping them to improve their learning of the perceptual space that's currently pertinent, or learning more generally, like, I don't know,
Yeah.
learning to make choices, learning to respond rapidly, learning whatever.
I guess that might have troubles in using this surprise signals to improve their behavior,
Right.
for different aspects, I guess. Perceptually specific.
Yeah.
Something.
I actually think that a perceptual framework brought to the orbitofrontal cortex is very interesting. Like, I think it's a very interesting way. In my own lab, we've worked on it from the visual point of view, but I don't mind. Any sensation is fine. But that thinking about the orbitofrontal cortex in terms of kind of optimizing the perceptual inputs that are currently relevant, but especially over certain time frames, because we're often in auditory oddball tasks, you're thinking about timing, but in other settings, we're mostly not thinking very much about timing.
Yeah.
And I think we might be missing the behavioral impacts may be most pertinent when there's specifically rapid timing.
They have some issues also with the timing perception, we know, but distillation, that can also,
So anyway, I guess I invite some more thought about the timing part, and where you might see OFC effects on behavior in perceptual contexts, where the timing is, like, it might be quite interesting to understand the timing when the damage to the OFC might show its effects, might have to do with, based on your intracranial results, the OFC is relatively early in reflecting signals. So it's prepared to do things quite quickly.
Yeah, and then sending to other areas.
Right.
Yes.
Potentially. So.
Yeah.
Anyway. Okay. What about, I guess, in terms of like, because there's responses, there's a physical response, you said they might be less surprised. Do you think they might have less autonomic or less orienting or less like non-specific arousal changes or something to unexpected events?
Yeah, it might be the case, but...
the somatic marker hypothesis rears its unstoppable head again. Could that be a potential readout that might be interesting to look at?
Yeah, definitely, but I cannot say with my data. But
yeah. Okay. So you chose to focus on EEG, and part of the reason I'm not focusing on it is I want to leave the second opponent full range to get into that with you. So I'm going to talk about the lesion aspect of the study with you now. A few things that kind of relate to interpreting, I suppose, the findings. So the clearest results, or the significant results, were related to relatively early ERP responses, the mismatch negativity and the P3A. And you just gave an explanation already of why you thought P3B is like not touched by the OFC damage, not affected by it. But let me ask you a technical question, I guess, about the ability to detect differences in relatively small samples. Even though this was a large sample of patients, it's still a small sample of people. And the relative, I guess, signal to noise on these different waveforms. Because even with a fixed, you've got an EEG readout, you've got the same sample, but the different waveforms are have more or less signal to noise, just by the nature of these things. Yeah.
So we somehow control for this, if it's what you mean. So we, they didn't have more. We compare the number of trials between OFC lesions and control participants. We check if they have more blinks, and some other measures to make sure that actually the ratio.
Right.
The ratio
so
to noise.
That's reassuring. I guess
Go
ahead.
Yeah, and then yeah, I guess the fact that some of the components actually were not altered, and we see an alteration only, or attenuation in this case, only in some of the components, and some of them were similar. I think it's also telling that.
Well, either that tells you that there's a great specificity, or it tells you that some components have a stronger signal to noise by nature of the component. Like an earlier component maybe has a sharper peak that's more robust across subjects, or more reliable within a subject, just by the nature of such things. The individual variability on trials or on people affects some peaks more than others. Just like in the structural imaging, the motor cortex is more consistent across people. It's easier to find differences in motor cortex morphology than it is to find differences in some part of the frontal lobe, which varies widely across people, and therefore you lose the signal in the variability. Because you could say that we were able to establish differences or lower mismatch negativity amplitude statistically different between OFC damaged people and people with normal brains.
I think these early signals are usually the signals that are more robust compared to later.
Yes.
So
the fact that you can't find differences later could be reassuring that this is specific, or it could just be we just needed, like, if we had 100 patients instead of 10, we would have found differences there too.
For the MMN, especially for the MMN, but also for P3A, these signals we see they are very robust, and that we know very well the timing.
Right.
And so I don't think they are like really good indexes of what we wanted to measure.
Yes.
And it's I would say mainly the later kind of components, which are.
So were there other early components that were intact that you looked at?
They were.
That were not affected by the OFC damage?
If there were
other early components that everyone would agree are easy to measure and.
Yes, we from the occurrence of the last tone.
Yeah.
So we check the window and see if there were differences.
Okay.
So it was only the MMN and P3B.
Since I'm not even being devil's advocate, I'm just advocating for the opposition. Because one possibility is that where you were able to detect effects, there are actually effects at all kinds. It's just that you're detecting them in these two waveforms that are especially clear to measure, if you want. Could it be that there, in fact, is widespread change in the electrophysiological, responses to these deviants after OFC damage? It's just that it becomes too noisy to measure in the sample that you have. Like, are you convinced that it's specific to these two waveforms, your effects? I'm supposed to make your life a bit difficult.
No, it's okay. But I think I didn't get the last.
I guess it's just this idea, like, I'll give you the analogy, which I know better, because I don't actually know that much about ERPs. But if you, I'm not supposed to say that either, probably. But I'll go back to the motor cortex. If you look at clinical studies, or they take a group of people with, I don't know, schizophrenia or something, and they scan them and do structural imaging, and then they have the normal sample, healthy sample, and they look for structural differences. Often in small sample studies, you get structural differences like in motor cortex and not elsewhere. It's like, oh, schizophrenia, motor cortex is thinner. But in fact, the whole brain is potentially, or many parts of the brain are different. It's just that you lack the signal. The signal to noise varies across the structure of the brain. So by analogy, the signal to noise surely varies across this bunch of waveforms you get evoked by deviant. And some of them might, some of the ones where you have better signal to noise, just because of that fact that they're happening in a more sharp way, you'll be able to detect a difference between groups.
Yeah, it might,
The real difference might also be there elsewhere, you just can't detect it.
The P3B, for example. You meant the P3B? Yeah, it might be the case.
I mean, you could kind of do, I guess, little local power calculations, I suppose. I don't know if this is done. I'll learn more about that in a minute from the second opponent. But okay, let me get back into my own space here. Let me get back into my lane. So, let's talk about the lesions that the people that you studied. They were people with chronic lesions, and I already kind of agree with your analysis and your thesis that the lateral prefrontal patients can't really be thought of as a strong regional test, but more as a brain damage control group, which is still a very useful thing to have. Can you talk about I guess, how you imagine these lesions changing what's going on in the brain, especially chronic lesions? Like, what's actually different in the brains of these people? Like, how do you think about the deviant occurs? What's happened because of the lesion? Like in the brain, what's not happening because of the lesion?
Yeah, I guess the input from the sensory areas to the orbitofrontal cortex, and then if it is not changed, but how the orbitofrontal cortex then use this input to setting the expectancy state, to build internal models in order to send the signal back to sensory areas or to like lateral prefrontal cortex or motor areas if you have to count or respond. Then the fact that we have the lesion there, it might affect how well models we build for the specific task we have to do, and then this influence also the representation that are or the representation signals that are sent to sensory areas, back to sensory areas, or how we prepare to act and our behavior at the end.
Right. So these are lesions caused by experiments of nature, as they say. They're not complete obliteration of the entire orbitofrontal cortex, but various kinds of focal damage that may be unilateral, bilateral, more or less in the white matter.
Some are smaller also. So
yeah.
the
So
size
can you comment on that in terms of how to think about actually what these lesions are doing? For example, some of the patients had unilateral orbitofrontal damage.
Yeah. It's just the brain tissue, number of neurons that is not there anymore.
Yeah.
So this is also why we see that this may affect the signal. And so the connections with other areas are affected as well.
Is there, I don't know, is there lateralization?
So there might be in the orbitofrontal cortex. The lesion was bilateral for all the patients. So I haven't thought about lateralization per se in the orbitofrontal cortex. However, for the lateral prefrontal cortex lesions, there might be more lateralization there, and how areas that are not affected by the lesion can compensate also in the function and tasks and the behavior at the end. So we know that after years of recovery, these patients can have almost normal functions most of the times, and other areas compensate as well.
What does that mean that other areas compensate? How does that work?
Yeah, I'm not sure how.
Nobody knows really.
But
I was hoping you would know.
I think brain is very plastic, so I think some of the functions of one area can be supported by other. Like in our case, I guess the counting, for example, was not affected if the OFC actually.
Right. I mean, as a neurologist, I guess I think most of the compensation is probably in the behavior, in the environment, in the way the person navigates the task.
I guess we learn how to do some tasks differently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Personally, I think that's the largest effect.
I think the human brain is really
well, especially for this kind of thing, which is pretty general. You could imagine more than one way to notice.
Yeah.
To notice a deviant. Okay. I guess.
It's not that we ask them to do something very demanding or.
Well, that's where I was trying to push you earlier to think about what would be the demanding thing. In what way would it need to be demanding for them to have a behavioral problem? like I'm coming back in a circle, but I'm interested to know what would that demanding thing be, in what sense demanding.
Yeah.
I know you don't know because that's not the experiment you did, but I'm interested in
Yeah,
your
I guess
reflections.
if we use like more complicated patterns, maybe
But
more
you got your
rhythmic.
clearest results with the simplest pattern,
No, I mean the behavior.
right? But in terms
Is-
of the EEG changes, the local effect were already clear. Why do you need to complicate things?
No, but you asked about
Yes.
how to make them actually, what kind of task to use to actually see behavior
Yes.
alteration. So this.
But you already see EEG changes with just the fifth tone in a sequence. You see differences.
Yes, we do see differences.
I find that
in
amazing.
age. I also find this amazing. But
So I guess it's not that you need to make the task very, very complicated to get effects in the EEG. You just need to know what those effects are doing, allowing the brain to do, allowing the person to do.
Yeah.
So then we could measure that thing. And then we would see a difference.
Yes, in the behavior, in
Yes.
the everyday behavior. You're
Well, in
thinking,
even in an experimental context. I mean, one of the problems with studying the frontal lobes in general, and maybe worst case scenario is ERP, because you have to do many trials, is that you basically remove everything that the frontal lobes are for in the experiment, right? You put in
And you get
regularities, you tell them what to do, you remove all distractions, and you
get the very basic.
and you only have one like possible behavioral output.
Yeah.
So it's a wonder that you find anything in, not just in your experiment, in general, it's a wonder that we find anything in people with frontal lobe damage, because we know what you need the frontal lobes for is like the opposite of what you do in the lab.
Yeah.
I mean, if you only needed one trial to measure reliably event-related potentials, what would that task be? Then we would really see what the frontal lobes do.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, though. Okay. All right, let me change gears slightly. And we talked about this a little bit at lunch, so I'm totally changing gears. I mean, you study people listening to a series of tones, and there's a piano right there, and you still didn't play them for us, but that's okay. I mean, and I didn't know this before, but I understand that the research group is connected to music research as well. So do you think the mechanisms that you're studying are relevant to music? Is that where we would see OFC damage effects and the appreciation of music?
I think in a basic, very basic level, yes. So this is a very simplistic pattern we use and build. However, I guess this can be related because when we perceive music, what we like is like the unexpected things happening in a melody, or and this like creating patterns and then somehow breaking these patterns, and it's what music does a lot. So I could say that this very simplistic paradigm can be linked to music, but not directly, I would say.
No?
No. It's we explore the auditory domain here, but it's very in a very perceptual, basic perceptual level, I would say. And then if we want to say a little bit more about how music, then I guess we can use a little bit more complex pattern, more rhythmic, using tones, but a little bit more variability, I guess, if we want to be more close to what music does.
I mean, I guess the good thing about music is it's got a time course that's similar to what your experiment had, more or less.
Yeah, to understand the timing and maybe
sort of the contextual expectations of patterns of sound, in the verse, in the chorus, in the verse.
Yes, in this, we can always connect these findings to what we do.
I mean,
when
I
we
actually think
perceive
that could be
music,
really
but
interesting, high yield to have, people, I know, again, I'm not an expert on this, but I work with people who are, and, the sort of momentary pleasure that people get in musical sequences is of
Yeah.
interest to people who study such things. And I guess I might predict that you're,
And we know that we enjoy surprises during the
well,
a
surprises,
music
but
piece.
also expected
Yeah, and
outcomes.
also we build expectancies during
Yeah.
music piece and then relief or
Right.
something.
So to the extent that you could
yeah.
get dynamic readouts of that, whether it's through subjective pleasure or through, I'm just twisting a dial, that's my subjective pleasure meter, but also through autonomic readout potentially, like skin conductance or whatever, you might see the OFC patients with something different.
Yeah, it might be the case. It's something maybe interesting to explore more by having also more rhythmic pattern and having them
Yeah, I don't know.
detect some surprises.
Yeah.
happening.
So I guess somewhat relatedly, there's this other big view of the orbitofrontal cortex / ventromedial frontal lobe, which I sort of think is one big chunk from the point of view of lesion studies anyway, is its role in value, subjective value, and reinforcement learning, where you get a choice and an outcome, and then you update
Yes.
your choices. Do you think what you're studying has anything to do with that?
This was not directly a reward task.
Yes.
However, I think that every time that we managed to do our task, that it was to actually detect that the deviant happening. It might be some type of evaluating that I did it right, and then
Okay.
learning signal. So, but no, this was not a directly reward evaluation
No,
task.
I understand that the task wasn't especially,
Yeah.
but do you think the mechanisms you're proposing or you have evidence to support are the same as what is involved with reinforcement learning, for example, around reward?
Yes, I think.
Or they're just two
yeah.
separate matters and the OFC
No, I
is a big
don't
place?
think. I think these things are linked. So yeah, As I said, it is rewarding when we perform well and we do what we're supposed to. So I guess this can be a rewarding signal that we know that the OFC has been linked a lot with this kind of reward learning.
Yeah.
So I think it's part of the process.
Okay. I mean, one of the ways that that's thought to happen, possibly, debatably, is through dopamine signal. Somehow the OFC may be influencing the dopamine signals, perhaps.
Dopamine?
Dopamine, yeah. Do you think that what you're studying has anything to do with those circuitries?
It might, but I don't. I don't examine anything of these things with the ERPs, and it was not the focus. However, it is part of like this neuromodulation. It's
okay,
can be affected of
let me
reward signals as well.
The fact that you have information in the time course of information in OFC and in lateral frontal regions from intracranial recordings is really cool. And that it's earlier in OFC and later in lateral PFC. I mean, the research that's been done so far as I know, especially on this using ERPs as the outcomes in relation to this sort of thing, has mostly looked at the lateral frontal lobe. Mostly is the lateral PFC that's been studied. Isn't that what Bob Knight mostly spent his time working on? I mean,
in this type of
task,
yeah,
and then these
inferior shorter gyros that is involved a lot, and especially from intracranial recordings. However, I think that the OFC is not has been not studied that much.
So one of the
it depends also a lot like where the electrodes are. So the studies I know at least from this auditory, local, global, and oddball paradigms, they involved a lot inferior frontal gyros.
Right.
Yeah, from the lateral PFC.
So one of the things that rock the world of people who study OFC from the point of view of reward learning reversal learning in particular, which is this task that's famously impaired after OFC damage in monkeys and in humans, and rats too, for that matter. And that was based on lesion studies in non-human primates going back decades, but that when more refined lesions were made with excitotoxic rather than surgical ablation methods, the literature or the results suggested that it wasn't the OFC at all, but rather probably the inferior frontal gyrus that was driving, at least in the monkey paradigm, the main reversal learning effects. So do you think you might have been accidentally studying inferior frontal gyrus in these people with OFC?
I think,
white
we
matter
have a
damage?
good control of the lesions in the orbitofrontal cortex. However, I was hoping that from the lateral group we could get a little bit more of the inferior frontal gyrus, but I think the lesion is mainly in the middle frontal gyrus, but not so much.
I guess if we extrapolate from the monkey literature where the lesions are made experimentally, it's possible that the type of damage that you get from surgical lesions in humans or stroke or other kinds of damage that for sure gets through to the white matter may be disconnecting the inferior frontal.
Some of them, but the big lesions and the big overlap was in more anterior areas. So it was Brodmann areas 10 and 11.
Right, that's where you see the damage. I know what you're looking at. Looked at the pictures.
Maybe affecting.
But there's the possibility of white matter disconnection, even likelihood of white matter mess up in these lesions.
Yes, this is this is a possibility, but it's something that I cannot control in this setup, or at least it was not.
It's a challenge, especially because of this monkey work. Obviously, it's best if you can show that people where you can clearly see the damages in IFG are definitely not affected. Then you feel more sure that you're not just unplugging the IFG.
I'm not aware of this specific study, but
Peter Rudebeck and Betsy Murray who did this.
This might be
causing everyone to get worried that they'd spent 10 years studying the wrong region, but
that we cannot control.
Not me. I was sure about what I was doing. Okay. So last question. Science is about making predictions and then acquiring evidence to support or not. What were the biggest surprises you had in your results?
The biggest surprises? Many. I would expect it that so the first idea was that the lateral prefrontal cortex group will show some alterations in the signals. However, this lesion group was not, the overlap was not, and topology of the lesions was not that good. And this is, I think, the reason we don't get something from there. So this was the first kind of surprise. And then something that it took me a little bit of time to explain, it was that we didn't see any alterations for the pure global. That also I was struggling a bit to discuss this and to find some reasons for why. Because in the beginning, before analyzing the data, I was expected to see there a difference. Like this would be really nice, like having nothing new in the coming from outside, then this creating an alteration signal. I think this will be really something that I expected and I didn't get, but
okay,
that might be reason.
That's the perfect segue, I'm sure, for questions in the second half. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so
much. It was a pleasure to read your thesis and have this discussion.
I would like to thank the first opponent and Kenneth for their efforts, and there will now be a short break, 15-minute break, and we gather here at 2 o'clock. We will now continue the public defense of Olgerta Asko's doctoral thesis. I hereby yield the floor to the second opponent.
All right. I think that's okay. Well, first of all, I would like to say thank you very much also for inviting me to participate as a committee member in this defense. It was really a pleasure to read the thesis. I learned a lot, and I think it's really impressive body of work. I mean, as we have already been been saying, it's a very complex work, I think, with many different methods involved, and patient population, and so on. And all of this makes it very, very complex, with many different aspects that you need to have become an expert on. And I think it's clear that you have, and that you can really manage all these different analysis techniques and methodologies, and so on, and always keeping in mind all the important things that one needs to consider when working with this different type of different types of data and analysis. I think that it was also very nicely and clearly written and expressed in the dissertation itself. I liked very much the introduction and the way that you kind of clarified each and every one of the concepts. This glossary of terms that you have around prediction, I think, is fantastic, and that's very important to clarify exactly what we are talking about, and to being precise. Okay. Well, so without entertaining myself too much, since there were already a lot of summarizing of the thesis and so on, I will move on to ask you some questions. So I will, of course, dwell a little bit more on some of the issues that were already raised, and try to also focus on some other aspects. But before going to specific questions, I would like to ask you if you can explain a little bit more exactly what has been your role in each and every one of the steps. So, like I was saying, this is a very complex work that involves, of course, collaboration in a team, and with different people. And there's intracranial recordings performed in during surgery, and then there's analysis, different types of analysis, and so on. And I think you are showing very clearly that this is your work, and that you understand and have had a great and very important contribution to all of this. But I think it's also important to know exactly what your role has been in each and every one of the steps of the two studies, in the data collection, in the design, in the analysis, and so on. Could you explain a bit more?
Yes. So my main study is the lesion study. So I have been involved in pre-processing the scalp EEG data, doing the whole analysis, formulating the research questions for the specific study, analyzing the neurophysiological test and the neuropsychological test we have, and some other demographic measurements and stuff. Reconstructing the lesions, making all the plots and the figures, And then this from the lesion study work. So from the intracranial study, I'm not directly involved. So we decided to add this data when we see that there is something interesting in CNV and how the orbitofrontal cortex is actually altering this signal. And because we work with these patients as well as a group, we had recordings from electrodes implanted in the orbitofrontal and some lateral prefrontal cortex area. So we just decided that we include this data as well to stronger or to see if the effect is there as well. So yeah, more or less, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Right. I think it's important. I mean, you have clearly had to learn many different things, but as was pointed out before, it's a collaborative work, and it's important then to know exactly what your contributions or your role have been in that. Okay, so I would like to ask you first some general questions regarding the choice of the task. So we already talked about this before, but of course it's important. So you have only you have just this one task that you are using in the two studies, and that you have chosen to answer specific questions, right? To understand this objective of the role of the orbitofrontal cortex in predictive processing. And you have chosen this local global paradigm, which I think is a great and fantastic choice. But it's also a kind of complex paradigm, and there's, I would say, like several assumptions that are made behind this, no? In what specifically this paradigm is measuring, and you explain this very well, and you talk about the local rules and the global rules and violation, and how it relates to that. But I would like to go a little bit more in detail into this. So you are linking this also to the whole predictive coding theory and ideas, and there's so several studies also from this perspective that have been using this paradigm and kind of relating it to this idea of the different hierarchical levels within predictive coding and the signals that you can obtain. But I guess I would like to know a little bit more in specific detail exactly why you think this is the best task to answer the questions that you are posing, and what exactly each of the signals that you obtain from this paradigm are measuring in terms of predictive processing within this context of the predictive coding theory that you have put it.
Yeah. So I think this task is the best we could have from what we want to explore, because first it had to be used in many other studies, showing very robust ERPs when different or a little bit different, like when they pay attention or they don't pay attention, or when they pay attention to the local deviant or when they pay attention to the global deviant. So there was this background showing a robust effect in healthy control, in healthy adults. Then I think it's very important when we want then to see differences in the ERPs in the lesion group, that we first have a really robust effect in the controls, and some robust ERP signals as well. So this is why this task is perfect, kind of, to see if this the MMN that is almost always present in this type of task, or like later components such as P3A or P3B, how they will differ in the lesion population as well. And then regarding your second part of your questions about how the individual ERPs can show this hierarchical predictive, right?
Yes, yes, exactly. Yes.
So then I think this task illustrates very well what happened when you have unexpected event happening in the local, very short-term level, and how the ERPs are changing when you have to implement the global rule, and how these two levels interact, which was actually what we wanted to, what the main focus it was at the end, to see how the global level interact with the local one, and how the ERPs will change.
So you would say,
and we actually saw this, that compared to the ERPs in the local level, the ERPs from when the global level was involved, there were larger in amplitude and longer, and yeah.
Okay, so so would you say that, so you say that the focus is on understanding how the global or wider or more abstract predictive model would say interacts then with the more local representations or
Yes.
so on. Okay, and so you I understand that then you are making this assumption or taking as an indicator that the mismatch negativity would be an indicator of the local level, and that the P3 responses would be indicator of the global level or of the global rule. And this would be prediction error responses at each one of these two.
I think this is a bit simplistic. It's not exactly the case, because the MMN, it is affected also by the global level, and it is affected also. It's not only a signal coming from sensory areas. It's a signal that it is affected of high order brain areas as well. So yeah, in this, then we cannot say that the MMN is only at the local level, and it's only auditory cortex, and P3B it's only high level and I don't know, frontal kind of high level areas. So I think that there is an interaction of brain areas and levels that we see in the ERPs, and we see in very, very clearly, I think, in the task in the ERPs in this task.
Okay. So in relation to this local and global, so you're looking here at predictions, right? And how do how do I phrase this? So I want to talk a little bit about identity predictions and temporal predictions, right? So these are two different kinds of prediction or of anticipation that we can have. In the paradigm that you are using, essentially. There isn't much of a manipulation of identity prediction, right? So it's more about, especially in the second part, in the second study, when you are looking at the anticipation, right? It's mostly about when something is going to happen, but the what is going to happen is kind of very clear. There isn't any sort of manipulation on that, or variability on that.
On the what?
On the what?
Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah.
Yes. I guess what I'm asking here is, so you want to look at these two levels, and several times before when we were kind of, Leslie was kind of pushing you to what would be a more challenging task, you were saying, well, perhaps something like a more complex regularity. Would that then involved more of identity predictions, and is that the difference that that in this case actually the global rule is not so much a more complex or abstract regularity, which would need to be at kind of like at a higher level of abstraction, but that we're really just looking at two different time scales, and that the lower level of the hierarchy, which if we would oversimplify, we would say just the auditory cortex, is only able to track shorter time scales, while the prefrontal cortex is tracking things on a longer time scale. So is it just a matter of time scales and temporal prediction within these time scales, or is it really that the higher level and the orbitofrontal cortex would be then more involved in something which is truly more abstract in terms of identity prediction?
Yeah, I think there is also I'll start with the last one, identity prediction, because like what is a global sequence, or what is a deviant sequence? It's the what, right? And it changes with blocks, so they have to know the rule, and they have to know the what. How, and I think in this task, what the time it is important, but it is more like implicitly, I would say. So one example is that they had like the local, that the timing is very short, and then the global, where you have to wait some sequences to see what will happen. And then also when in the second study, the time was important in the sense that somehow the timing, or like how many global deviants have happened before actually, how many global standards have happened before actually the global deviant to occur. This is also somehow like tracking the timing of what something will happen. So I think both are part of tasks, but the timing may be a little bit more implicitly. Was your questions what kind of more complex what should be added?
No, I guess that the question is, what do you think is more relevant here? So, I mean, the study is about finding out what the orbitofrontal cortex is doing, right?
Yeah.
And then you use this task to sort of answer this question. But and in here I see a bit of ambiguity in terms of what exactly we are measuring. So
the original thing was the what. So how the brain tracks the what, and how understand if this what is like based on the global rule, if this what is a deviant, is an omission, or so on and so forth. However, the timing also implicitly plays a role in how we construct these regularities, because it's involved also regularity of the what, right?
That's right, but perhaps, I mean,
so I think
it's just
both. Yeah, I would say yeah. But I'm also thinking myself.
yes. No, I guess what I'm trying to say is that because because there isn't really a manipulation of abstract regularity, let's say. So perhaps something like these other types of oddball paradigms where the rule is not based on repetition, so it's not about the frequency of so much the frequency of something, but it's an abstract rule in terms of, well, a low tone is always followed by a long tone, or
Some links.
something like
Links,
that. So
yeah.
that is a more abstract regularity, a more complex regularity. In this case, I think, or at least I get this kind of, that makes me think about it, that it's repetition of an object in a shorter time scale because the object is shorter, or in a longer time scale. So you need like to kind of represent in memory a longer time, because the object that you are tracking the repetition of is just a longer object.
Yeah.
But if you consider the whole sequence just as an object, as a, if you would use a complex sound that has all, variations and all kinds of different frequencies and characteristics over time, a more like natural complex sound would be like that, no? And you wouldn't necessarily be thinking of it as a sequence, and then this global regularity is just like a long sound that always needs to follow the same pattern, and this long sound is repeated or is not repeated, or it has a change within it, right? So I guess what I'm saying is that so I guess what I'm asking is if you really think that with this paradigm you are able to really ask the question of what the contribution to global, more kind of context regularities to the of the orbitofrontal cortex is, or if you're really just asking the question of when to be able to track a regularity, you need to sort of, have a longer time span, to look back in a longer time span in memory, then you need the orbitofrontal cortex, because I guess these are two different things, right?
Yeah, somehow with expectancy steps that we have in the design of this, somehow we have this like learning pattern, or they have to remember how many before, like how many trials before I had a deviant, and somehow they learn that there is specific number of standards occurring between the two deviants, and we saw from the CNV and from the brain signals that they can track actually this. So in this sense, it can be like an abstract representation of the whole block, or like, but I don't know how back they go in the trial path to actually to infer what will come next.
Okay. So picking up on this, on how far back they go. So I would like to also come back to another question that was already asked, but now maybe with this perspective in mind. So the point is that when the block starts, they have to first learn the pattern, right? So there's a few.
They have 20 repetitions.
Exactly. So they have 20 repetitions, right? This is fixed, and after that, then you start looking. You start looking at the differences. Perhaps because you are kind of a little bit at ceiling, right? So behaviorally, there are no differences. They are able to count and to detect them, and it's a relatively very simple task and very simple regularity to follow. Perhaps you would have more success at finding more kind of fine-tuned differences if you looked at the evolution of how this regularity is being encoded. No, so that's the question of, is there a difference between like at the beginning of the block and at the end of the block? And essentially, do you think that there might be a difference in this, how much buildup of evidence is needed in the patients versus in the control? So how many repetitions do you think that are needed to encode this regularity, and for it to sort of start having an effect on the processing of the incoming signal? And do you think that this would be something perhaps critical to look at if there is a difference between the groups in this?
Yeah, I haven't like really thought of having like, or if there will be something there, or how to make this, like having maybe like looking back to the looking back to the history of a trial and how this affects. This might be maybe good idea to look at some methods, like how the previous trials affect what is
The
coming,
sequential effects.
the sequential effects. However, with what we have right now, I think we cannot say much about this effect, if there is there or not. We can just say how they, during the whole block, how if they are in trial that is like more expected event will occur or not, and how this expectancy is indexed in the brain signals, based on in which trials they are. So if they are, for example, in a trial where they are just a deviant happen, then they're in this trial, then it's less expected that a global deviant will happen again, and then if some trials have passed, then it's more expected that a deviant will happen.
This will only happen after the regularity has been discovered, let's say, or encoded. So they need to have
I think in this type of tasks, the regularity is really easy to discover.
So how did you decide on the initial 20 repetitions? So is this based on evidence of in control subjects?
I think what people
how long does it take to kind of encode this regularity?
I think it's very well known from previous studies using the same paradigm or a little bit variation of the paradigm, that they use these 20 trials to actually learn, that participants can learn the global rule. And then also the number of trials we have as in the test period is more or less how people usually do it. And also, of course, the number of trials is like what we need also to get some good enough number for our ERP analysis, right? Yeah.
Okay. So in terms of this expectancy and building up, and what you were saying of depending on how many previous sequences there have been before, so I liked very much this idea of using the CNV in this very different type of paradigm where it has been used before, but I couldn't help but thinking or making this analogy all the time that so what you call the expectancy step, right? Is basically like the hazard function of in temporal expectation studies, right? Would you say that's
it can be this, and it can be also a combination, because we somehow have specific we control also like the how often can the chunks happen within a block. for example, it's more often that you get like a deviant after 2 standards than a deviant after 3 standards, for example. So we also have some manipulation on this, how possible, the percentiles of this chunk occurring within the block. But mainly, I think it's it's like how many standard have already passed. So I'm preparing that a deviant will come. So yeah, it's the hazard rate. Yeah, mainly.
So
At least it's what we see also from the step. Yeah.
okay, so what you're measuring in terms of expectancy or anticipation is then would you say that we can interpret this in the same way as this is interpreted in temporal expectation studies when you're looking at the hazard function, right? So it's this buildup of expectancy over time, and the electrophysiological signals that you are seeing that are modulated by this manipulation, by the expectancy function, would be then an index of this hazard function, of this temporal anticipation of or buildup.
Yes, I think it's part of the process, definitely.
Okay. Okay, so then, and I'm sorry to insist, but then this makes me go back. I keep kind of myself going in circles into this, but this then makes me go back into, so how is this different from just basic temporal expectation and signaling this global more this like global internal representation that you're trying to get at, or is there really no difference?
Yes, this was also something that we had discussed a lot, and I don't know if we can surely say that what we measure it's not it's like
okay,
so we have
okay.
kind of the same thoughts or discussion on it, but still I think it's really impressive how healthy controls, they use this very implicit kind of rule and how we manipulate it through the blocks to actually somehow, and it's very simplistic task, to actually somehow prepare for that now a deviant is coming. And I think the fact that we see this on the CNV slope, I think it's it's really important in a sense, and that we don't see it for VOFCs.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just trying to get at the more like fine interpretation of what exactly are the the physiological processes. So these indices that you're using, what exactly are they are they indexing? Yeah. So let's try to tie this to the to the predictive coding framework, right? And let's so I would like that if we are able to kind of put each of these indexes in their place within this framework to understand better what exactly is the role that you are testing. So so for example, you're highlighting constantly that and this would be kind of like the take home message, as you said before, and so on, that the orbitofrontal cortex is involved or responsible for building an internal like global model of the sensory environment, right? This is what you would say. So and the sort of electrophysiological evidence that we have for this is, for example, this CNV buildup, right? So that it is larger. So so the activity that we are measuring in the CNV, you would say that that is what is representing this internal model in some way. What exactly is representing? So what is this activity? Where does it come from beyond just orbitofrontal cortex?
I think it's a top-down expectation. I would say, and it has been also shown in another study. So it's like it's the building, how we build up the expectation during the process of, I would say,
Okay.
How we prepare. Yeah.
Okay.
So it means
so if we have to put this in
somehow-
terms of in terms of neural activity, so we see that there is an increasing amplitude of a signal that that we should think is coming from the orbitofrontal cortex, right? Is this what we?
The orbitofrontal cortex is definitely involved, we can say. However, I think this signal is it's a slow and a signal we record from or coming from broader brain network. So it's not only the OFC, I think.
Okay.
And usually these anticipation signals come from more motor areas or
Okay.
But definitely, I will say that what we show here is that the OFC is part of this process of the building up of these signals, and which makes us prepare for what is coming, and then sending
So what exactly is coming from the OFC then? So so you're saying is that in the OFC we are representing a complex global regularity, right?
Yes.
So my question is, how is this then represented in the OFC? Because I mean, it's an auditory. In this case, it's an auditory regularity, right?
Yeah.
But as we already mentioned before, auditory representations in the OFC would not. I mean, it's hard to think of it in that way. So so what kind of
but the OFC
representation?
It's a hub kind of area that actually builds up the internal model or the setting up the expectancy state to actually and send it to other brain areas to make us act at the end. But so I see the OFC as a hub where helps us maintain the context and remember the pattern, and then sending signals to other brain areas. It's not only OFC. I would never think about it actually, and the fact that the lesion to the OFC attenuates the signal, it doesn't mean that the signal is coming only from the OFC.
Okay. So how do you imagine the circuits then? What?
Yes.
So just to to kind of.
Yeah.
I know you can't answer directly just with your data, but
input comes to sensory auditory cortex, and then we know that there are direct links to the orbitofrontal cortex, and so if the orbitofrontal cortex is this hub that actually helps us build our representation. So we keep there the information it is or the representation of the external world, and the OFC sends back signals both to auditory areas to actually shape what we will expect to receive, but also to other areas like more posterior to sensory motor or motor areas to actually prepare us for action.
Okay.
If this is counting, then it's counting. If it's another type of response, prepare us, And we know that there are, there are links.
Okay. And so how do you imagine that this internal representation is working in the orbitofrontal cortex. So if it's kind of like a general type of representation. So what I guess what I'm asking is, what is the information content of this of this representation?
Yeah, it could be like representing the state we are during the task, like where I am now, what maybe the timing as well, how
Okay.
far I am
Mhm.
from the last deviant, for example, in this case, and maybe just like we know that the OFC is implicated in these cognitive maps, so just helping us like keeping the cognitive map of the task we are currently performing, and keeping the context,
Okay.
yeah, to help us act.
Okay. So keeping a bit in this circuit idea, and then going back again to the idea of the hierarchical predictive coding, right? Which is the model that you introduce in your thesis to sort of explain or contextualize all of your findings. So yeah, so now you're talking about the sensory area, which is the auditory cortex, would, you know, be sending signals to the orbitofrontal cortex, and then there is this top-down flow of information back to the auditory cortex from a more sort of global internal model to affect the more local internal model in
how we
the
perceive
auditory
yeah.
auditory cortex.
Yeah.
Okay. But then we bring another player into the field, right? Then you have also the lateral prefrontal cortex.
Yes.
And then you also have some evidence where you're looking at kind of like the time, the crosstalk between these two regions, and how, and you say how the orbitofrontal cortex seems to be leading the lateral prefrontal cortex. So should we understand this as a, if we kind of, you know, try to really fit it into this
Yes.
model of the predictive coding, that we would have auditory cortex, lateral
Yeah.
prefrontal cortex, and on top orbitofrontal cortex? Why would the orbitofrontal cortex be a higher level than the lateral prefrontal
I think
cortex?
it's just the activity starts from the orbitofrontal cortex, because it's like it builds the model, it has the context that then is sent to more lateral areas that are more related to preparation or response. So I see this first activity in the OFC and later in the lateral PFC. That the lateral PFC needs some input or information from the OFC to then keep going with what we want to do, like preparing our actions and stuff.
So if we think in terms of top-down predictions and bottom-up prediction error, right? In the terms of the predictive coding model, and we have this hierarchy which we have constructed now, and we really try to bring it to the very specific case of your paradigm, and so what would be the prediction, and you have like different indexes and different things that you have been measuring, right? So so of these different indexes, what would be sort of like the prediction error signals that are going from auditory cortex to lateral prefrontal cortex, and perhaps more intriguing, what kind of prediction errors would go from lateral prefrontal cortex to orbitofrontal cortex?
From lateral to orbitofrontal?
Yes.
What specific ERPs that we measure?
Yeah. So if we're trying to fit your data into this model that would work like this, no, based on the evidence that we have. Since you find this leading role of the orbitofrontal cortex, then we should, you know, imagine that this is at the very top of the hierarchy. But then, and perhaps, of course, all of this is simplifying,
Yeah,
but
I don't-
the idea would be that there's
Yeah.
always this, you know, prediction error going
So,
up, and
like evidence from causal modeling analysis and in the
Yeah.
cranial, it's like it starts from the auditory cortex, and then the superior temporal gyrus, and then the inferior frontal gyrus,
Yeah.
and so then the global rule is mainly in the inferior frontal gyrus, the global predictions. However, in my case, I don't have I don't have recordings, for example, from the temporal lobe or some other associated areas. So I think that what we see here is mainly the OFC keeps the global kind of rule, and the MMN can be a signal coming mainly from the temporal lobe and auditory areas. And the CNV is coming more from more frontal areas. That it's actually about our top-down expectations. Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, as I said before, this is an impressive amount of work that that you did, and you have a lot of analysis and a lot of results. But clearly, there's also more things that are probably coming, and in that there's, I think, two main things that I am very curious about, or that I think would be very useful to understand all of this, what we're trying to figure out, and yeah. So in this relationship between like the prediction error, the deviance, and then the anticipation, right? If we again, you know, follow the predictive coding model, which is the one that you have put a frame around, we should see a direct relationship between these two things. So basically, the prediction error is the input minus the prediction. So kind of like the anticipation signals or the expectancy signals would be the prediction or the representation of the internal model, right? And so there should be a very tight correlation between the expectation part, which is more like your second study, and the deviance responses, which would be the prediction error, which is more in your first study. But you haven't really made much of the disconnection between the two studies, and there seems to be also some things that don't seem to exactly match up, or some contradictions, right? So for example, in the first study, you don't look directly at at like the buildup of the expectations or so on, but you do have the standards. And in principle, so the sensory response should always be like the bottom-up response, and if we follow the interpretation of the ERPs from the predictive coding idea, would be that all the ERPs are just the prediction error, right? So if we have a higher expectation, we should see a modulation on the response to the standards. But you see no effect on the standards, as far as I could, exactly, no lesion effect on the standards. But on the other hand, then so this seems not consistent with the modulation of the expectancy-related signals that you see in the second study. And I wonder if you can. I am guessing that you probably have started to look at more of these things.
standard in the first study a difference when we compare the two groups in the standard tones. However, we haven't checked if the CNV is correlated with the response to the standard tones. It's what you're saying, right?
Yes.
How the expectancy
Yes.
is actually affecting
Yeah.
processing of standard or deviance, of
Yeah.
course. That
Yeah.
because I think the deviants are more important in this paradigm. So I think, yeah, you are right. I think we should expect correlation of the CNV signal and how this affects deviant, the processing of the deviant or the deviant signals we get, or the standard. So I think what we want to do now is just see, like, putting somehow together
Yes.
the two studies and see how CNV slope is correlated with the later response of a deviant or omission or standard, because we have different kind of things that we can look at.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this is a really nice suggestions and something that we're gonna do for like.
Yes, of course. I am guessing that. I mean, there's so much
to improve the paper,
work that you can still and of course the emissions are the other thing that I'm really wondering about. So
we also are
so have you started looking at that?
Yes.
And can you tell us something about the omission?
We have starting. So it's more or less the same pattern, I would say. So there is omission response difference, however, between the two, between controls and the OFC lesion, but it's not that strong as the MMN mismatch.
Well,
yeah,
I mean, the emission responses are always
and
already.
then I think we're trying also to do some time frequency analysis for the omissions to see if there's, but it's and someone else working with it.
Okay.
But I'm also part of it, so I know a little bit of how it's going.
Looking forward to hear
Yes.
to hear about that and to know what comes out. But now that you mentioned time frequency, let's talk about frequency bands. So in the second study, you have these two different measures, the high frequency intracranial recording, and then you have the CNV, which supposedly somehow both measure somehow the buildup of expectations, but then you actually have like different results with both things, and you're also discussing a lot how maybe these two signals are of course not the same, and how they, but it's kind of like there's a lot of open questions there. And I guess one of the things that stand out to me is that, well, you're looking at very high frequencies versus a very slow very slow signal, right? And these also have, again, different roles within the predictive coding models and so on. So could you elaborate a bit on what do you think of these two signals and their role?
So these two signals are definitely different in the way also that when we record the CNV from the scalp, it's a mix of like a network, and as you said, it's really slow signal. However, when we record the high frequency activity from intracranial electrodes, then we have like specific space, so we know from where exactly we record, and we know the timing very well. So the two signals are, in this sense, they're not measuring the same thing, the same process. However, we use these two measurements to see how the expectancy change these two signals, like the CNV from the scalp EEG, and the high time frequency activity in the intracranial, because these two signals has been linked previously with this top-down expectancy, or like the differentiation of what is more or less expected. Yeah, like both the frequency, the high frequency activity from from intracranial recordings. So we use this to see if the expectancy before something occurs is change actually this activity, and the same for the CNV. But of course, we know that it's not. The two signals are not the same thing. We're not measuring exactly the same thing. And in respect also with timing, they're somehow, they are different. So CNV is a signal that develop during long times, in comparison to the high frequency activity that is a very short spiking kind of activity that we capture.
Okay. So do you think this has something to do with this idea of different frequency bands having different roles in the circuitry? Or is it just, I mean, it's a different measurement technique to start with?
It's a different measurement technique, I will say, that we have to use because of, the data are different, like from recording from scalp and intracranial data. So I think this is part of how the data are. So
do you think they are not related at all, or does the high frequency brain activity contribute to the CNV, or not at all, or what?
There are some studies, but so when I was trying to see how these two can be correlated, they're not such a direct link, but there are studies showing that what CNV measures in the scalp has been linked to high frequency activity in the intracranial, and so this is why we've somehow thought that we can use this this measure to actually see how expectancy affect frequency activity.
Okay. All right. So we talked now a lot about these two signals, the CNV and the high frequency brain activity. And this another one of the indices that you're using that is also a bit and this is of course absolutely not your fault, but it's kind of very fussy, no? The whole P3 family of responses are sometimes so ubiquitous or unspecific that that in the end it's finally sometimes it feels like in the end they're not so useful because they are everywhere and we can't really exactly pinpoint sort of like
the P3B,
the whole P3 the whole P3 family, right? So now here you are looking at what you have differentiated P3A and P3B and then you don't find what you expected. Then you sort of turn to this explanation of the P3B more as a target response and not so then involved in what you are specifically looking at. And at some point, you also, in the explanation of your findings, you turn to the idea of precision weighing and perhaps attention to sort of explain a little bit what is happening there with the P3A and P3B, which is not really following what you are. What you expected, let's say. But like you start from a point where you are saying, okay, I'm going to use this global local paradigm, and I have these two indices, the local, the mismatch negativity, and the global, the P3, and so from a very kind of clear interpretation of, okay, the P3 is going to be my signal, which is indexing the high-level prediction error or a violation of the global rule. No, please correct me if I didn't understand.
Not necessarily. I was not thinking that the P3B will be the global rule, and if no. And also, so we don't see the P3B everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
We see only P3B in when the global deviant is part of the process. So we
Mm-hmm.
see it in the local plus global. We see the P3B, and the global, the pure global, we see only a P3B actually.
Yeah.
So we don't see a P3B for when they detect.
Yeah,
the
no,
local.
I when I say
Yeah.
it's everywhere, I didn't mean in your
So,
study.
and
I
this-
mean
yeah,
in the
so it's-
literature. I
and
mean,
this is why
yes.
it makes me think that this is a global detection or counting
Yes.
component in this task, or
Yes.
paying attention. It's what we ask
Yeah.
them to do, actually, paying attention to
Yes.
the globals, because we see this component only when they have to detect the global
Yeah.
deviance of the whole
Yeah.
sequence that is deviating from the rule, let's say. So we don't see it everywhere, and we don't, yeah.
So would you say that this is an attention-dependent signal? Because I mean, you have it's a big melon. I don't want to open now in the
No, it's
last
okay.
minute, but you ask them to pay attention to the global the
Yeah.
global violation, and there isn't much talk or discussion about the interactions between attention and
Yes.
prediction, but this can definitely affect very much what you are measuring,
It would
right?
be really nice if we had another condition, like
Mhm.
asking them not paying attention, or asking them doing another task, so we see if they have the P3B there
Yeah.
that I explain as an attention task. So yeah, with the fact that with this paradigm, we ask them to do something very specific. So we ask them to pay actually attention to the global deviance, and then we see this P3B for the global deviance detection. Then, and it has been linked, of course, with counting. And this is why I interpret this signal as mainly paying attention and detecting, like doing my task, what I have been asked to do, and not so much like deviance detection per se.
So do I understand correctly? I'm asking this because it's, what is the P3 is the question. So I want to know your opinion. So what I'm understanding is that you're sort of differentiating. Okay, so there is a P3B that has to do with the target detection and with this attention, and there is a P3A which would be more like this high level global prediction error, which is actually what you wanted to get at.
So we don't see the sort of similar studies when they don't ask to people to pay attention. Then we don't see this pronounced P3B. So this is also an index of that is an attention kind of signal. But of course, they are mixed sometimes. The results, so they have P3A called P3B, and
yes,
you know better.
Yeah, this is why I'm asking. I want to know what you think.
But I think that some of the strong points of this work is that the components were quite, at least from the first study, quite clear and robust, and have clear MN, P3B, and P3A. And, it's usually not that clear in always in other studies.
No, they look yes. Okay, well, I think we have picked your brain enough. I just want to ask you one last question, which I always like to ask. It's like you have learned a lot from this journey, I am sure. And what we can learn the most from is, so if you now, knowing everything you know now, would have to start all over again, what would you do different?
If I also could have had my own unlimited funding.
Yes, let's go for it.
So I would use one task again, maybe with some like a variant of paying attention or not paying attention, like, but very like the same tasks, and test like trying to have lesion patients and doing this many years, doesn't matter, but with the same thing, and so that the lesions overlap is really good, and from different prefrontal areas. And I guess if I had the possibility to have also intracranial, then I will try to have as many as possible recordings with the same task from many brain areas, and then putting this all together and see what the pattern will come. This is maybe too optimistic.
You would stick to this task and this and these measures?
I think what I tried, or what we tried to do a little bit in this last paper, like this triangulation kind of, it's really important to understand the brain, just putting evidence from. So yes, I would, yeah, kind of try and continue with kind of the same, similar stuff, I would say, and similar methods for sure, but the task maybe can be a different one, but the same task with different methods.
Okay, good. Well, thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Yeah, thank you as well.
I would like to thank the second opponent and Kenneth for this discussion. No one has asked to speak as an ex-auditorio. If anyone wishes to do so, please speak up now. Would the candidate like to make any closing remarks?
I think I'm fine for today.
You are fine for today. Then I just will hand over some flowers. I think I put them there or there.
Yes.
And here's a gift from
Yes.
the Faculty of
Yeah.
Social Sciences.
Yes, thank you so much.
The defense is hereby closed. The rector of the University of Oslo and the university board will be notified. On behalf of the Department of Psychology and the Faculty of Social Sciences, I thank you for this disputation. And we close by saying fabula acta est.
And there will be a reception now in the written kitchen starting soon.